My vegan journey has actually been a long and rather bumpy one. I've been a committed vegan for about 10 years, but before that, I was in and out of veganism and vegetarianism for probably 20 years. I first became vegan because of my love for animals. I grew up in South Africa, where we were so lucky to have such amazing wildlife, and I really developed such a respect and love for wild animals. I also had some amazing pets when I was growing up who were really like good friends to me. So when I heard about this lifestyle called veganism that involved no intentional harm or suffering to any kind of animal, I was really intrigued, and I just knew that it was the path for me. But like I said, some challenges came my way. The first challenge came when I fell pregnant, and I was advised by my close friend and mentor that I should probably eat some fish and some dairy products to make sure that my protein and calcium needs were covered. Now, back in the day, about 24 years ago, there wasn't mainstream knowledge about the fact that it's perfectly healthy to have a vegan pregnancy. In fact, the American Academy of Dietetics has a statement that pregnancy is healthy for vegans and that also for infants. And that in fact, not only is it healthy, but it's beneficial. One of the reasons that it's beneficial is that we live in a really toxic world, and toxins actually bioaccumulate the higher you go up in the food chain. So if you're eating plants which are low on the food chain, you're going to have the least toxic exposure. Even if you're buying organic animal products, our environment is so toxic and so polluted that all of the toxins that are accumulated in the plants concentrate in the animal products as you move up the food chain. Now, of course, being advised to eat fish and dairy was probably the worst advice I could get because our oceans are so polluted. And so eating fish really introduces a lot of toxins into the body. And of course, the fluids of animals, which is what dairy is, also concentrate toxins. So I unfortunately got some very bad advice, which sadly I took. But I was able to get back on the wagon again. I did, however, have some other missteps along the way. I think part of the reason that it was a little hard for me to stick with it was that I really hadn't thought the issues through very carefully, and I hadn't done a lot of research. I really wasn't aware of the way that animals are raised. I hadn't read up on the idea that animals are bred and raised only to be slaughtered, so that even if they're free range and supposedly ethically raised animals, they have always been considered profit, and so their needs are really never taken into consideration. And of course, their lives are ended at a very young age against their will. So once I started to read all of this information, once I learned about the environmental devastation, which I had not really heard much about either, I began to realize that I really needed to commit to this lifestyle. At the same time, one of my young sons was telling me that he was finding meat really gross and that he loved animals and didn't see why he needed to continue eating meat. So we had a talk with a pediatrician because both my sons were animal lovers and were interested in this lifestyle. And our pediatrician is luckily a very good doctor, and he keeps very up to date on the research. So he was aware that vegan diets are very healthy, and he encouraged us to go ahead and take that step. So then my family really committed to veganism, and we haven't looked back, which has been such a blessing. When I finally committed to veganism, I really felt liberated. I hadn't realized this, but I had been carrying this heavy burden of guilt around on my shoulders for so long. And when I was finally able to shed that, I just felt so light and so liberated. That's one of the things I love about being vegan, is that you have such a light footprint on the planet, and you also spare so many animals from so much suffering. Another thing that I love about being vegan is that it's really expanded my life in so many ways. People will sometimes say, well, isn't it restrictive to be vegan? But I found it to be the complete opposite. I find that I've tried out new foods and in fact discovered new foods that I had never heard of before or never tried before. I learned new cooking techniques. I learned about the plant-based basis for many ethnic foods. And so my cooking and my palate have just expanded tremendously since going vegan. Also, like I said, I've learned so much about animals, about the environment, about health, and I've met so many amazing people. I have to say that without a doubt, going vegan was one of the best decisions I've ever made in my life.
So I've been vegan for almost 10 years. And as a child growing up, I just have never liked meat, but I really did love dairy and ate a lot of dairy. But at the point where I was starting to hear about the cruelty of the dairy industry and the environmental destruction, those sorts of things, it was a time in my life where I just had this amazing dog who really changed me, and I was just so bonded to him on like a soul level, and just so in tune with him, and really focusing on whether he was happy and having fun, and it just seemed like strange to be eating a product from an industry that was so cruel, and at the same time being so bonded to this dog. He just allowed me to really connect with all animals. And so I think at the time that I started to learn more about the dairy industry, I had this dog and was just very open to those messages, and so the transition to becoming fully plant-based was made a lot easier that way. The one thing I did struggle with was baked goods, because I just have a really sweet tooth, and I just craved all kinds of baked goods. But luckily I have a daughter who's an amazing chef, and she had a lot of fun learning how to cook wonderful desserts and sweet things without animal products. And as that happened, I just stopped craving the sweets and things that included animal products, and I saw how easy it is to replace those baked goods with plant-based options.
So I grew up in your typical standard American diet household. We loved animals, we had pets, but we also ate a lot of meat and dairy. And when I was a teenager, I started making the connection, and I stopped eating most animals, but I would still have chicken and fish every once in a while, but I was consuming a lot of dairy. And I had really bad asthma when I was a child, so bad that I could not do PE with my friends at school. So it wasn't until I watched Forks Over Knives and started educating myself on the benefits of plant-based eating, and I completely took all animal products out of my diet, especially dairy, because I was consuming a lot of dairy, and my asthma disappeared. My lifelong asthma, horrific heartburn, horrible painful IBS, and unexplained hives, all of which I went to doctor's office visits for years, and they prescribed just harmful drugs that did not work. And it wasn't until I educated myself that all those health problems went away. Okay. So I realized the problem was mostly dairy, because once I took that out, mainly my asthma, because when I used to exercise, I always had to have my inhaler with me in case I had an asthma attack. And once I went whole food plant-based, I started running faster than I did 20 years earlier. I started placing in organized runs in my age group. I just beat my boys up Cardiac Hill on my mountain bike this morning at Lexington. So it's amazing how much it's improved my athletic performance too. Much better quality of life.
So I have a few pieces of advice for vegans. First of all is try to find a support group. It's really important to have like-minded people who you can brainstorm issues with and ask questions and just have fun. So you can look for a plant-based meetup in your area, or if you have an email group for your neighborhood, such as Nextdoor, you could put out a note on that to see if you have any vegans or plant-based people in your neighborhood. I know that's how our group, Plant-Based Advocates, actually got started. One of our members, Kathleen, put out a note asking if there were any plant-based people in the neighborhood, and that's how our group was born. So I would encourage you to do something like that. Otherwise, if there is no one in your area, you can always connect with vegans online through Facebook or Meetup or something like that. And of course, some organizations offer free vegan mentors who you can communicate with via email or meet in person if you live in the area. So you could check out Vegan Outreach, or even PETA have mentors for new vegans who are looking for some support. Another recommendation I would have is that when you're vegan, people are going to ask you questions. Sometimes they're asking questions out of curiosity, but other times they're actually trying to challenge you a little bit, because the fact that you're vegan is actually making them question their choices. Maybe they're feeling a little bit of guilt, and so they try to sort of catch you out and find inconsistencies that will help them feel better about their choices. So I've noticed that the same number of questions crop up over and over again. And it can be a really good idea to just have some well thought out answers to the typical questions that will crop up, such as, where do you get your protein? And what if you were stuck on a desert island and the only thing you had to eat was meat? There are some very thoughtful vegans online who have crafted wonderful answers that you can find. You can search vegan blogs, you can look on podcasts, you can even just Google the question, or of course go on YouTube. There are many YouTubers who have answered these questions very thoroughly. And so just having a little preparation so that you're not tongue-tied when someone asks you one of those questions can be really helpful. My next piece of advice dovetails off of that, and that is that it's wonderful to educate people, and I really encourage that. I encourage respectful conversations and even respectful debates. But once you start getting into an argument with someone, you've already lost that person. And that is because in an argument, there has to be a winner and a loser, and pride gets involved. When that happens, facts mean nothing, and it's all about pride, and you're not ever going to be able to convince someone that they're wrong in that kind of a combative environment. So it really is best in that case to just de-escalate things and just say something like, well, let's just agree to disagree, or, well, I don't think we're going to convince each other this time, so. And then you just drop the subject and move on to something else. For some people, it's really best to just be a good example rather than get into heated arguments with them. And the same applies online. I find it really unproductive to get into combative arguments with people online. I've found that it's rarely successful, and I would encourage everyone to be really respectful and polite online and in person when you're trying to educate people. My next piece of advice, my last piece of advice actually, is that it can be heartbreaking to find out what's happening to animals and how the environment is being destroyed by animal agriculture. But we really need to stay optimistic and hopeful so that we can make positive changes. It's really important to have a happy life, to be a joyful and positive person. So I encourage people to have fun and to make sure that you're prioritizing self-care, read up on positive psychology, and enjoy this wonderful lifestyle. Feel proud of yourself for the choice that you've made, and enjoy all of the wonderful opportunities that it's going to bring into your life.
My advice for people who are interested in going plant-based is don't let perfection be the enemy of the good. Meaning, don't just give up if it gets hard. Keep trying, keep tweaking things, changing things, and just keep your overall goal in mind. Many people find that it's not going to happen overnight, and it's often best done in stages. So one thing you could do is start meal by meal. For example, just start having breakfasts be plant-based, then move to lunch and then dinner. Or you could go product by product, cutting out meat in stages, then dairy, and then eggs, because really that's all you're cutting out from your diet, is just 3 things: meat, dairy, and eggs. As you progress, you'll find it just gets easier and easier. Your confidence builds, and you find alternative products that you love. You get better at finding recipes and staples that are just quick and easy to make, and it just becomes such a part of your life that you just can't imagine how easy it could be. So that's my advice. Just stick with it and keep your ultimate goal in mind, and don't throw things out if you slip up once in a while.
So, my advice to people going vegan or thinking about going vegan is to understand that you will be so excited about the information that you've learned about the health benefits of going plant-based, about the cruelty to the animals, of what's happening in the factory farms, to how animal agriculture is affecting the climate. And you will become so aware of this, and it'll become your world, and you'll be shocked that people don't know it, because they don't. And you'll want to tell everybody, and just understand not everybody is ready to hear that message. You need to tell them gently, and just understand and be patient, especially with family and your good friends who may be animal lovers. They're just not ready to hear the information. So it'll become a very important part of your world, but just understand not everybody is ready to hear about the cruelty of animal agriculture and all the devastating environmental impacts of animal agriculture. And they're also just set in their ways, and they're not ready to give up any of the foods that they love, of their animal-based foods, especially dairy. And once you become vegan, you will become more aware of the horrific cruelty involved in animal agriculture. And I still get this today, where I will occasionally get somebody who asks me, "Are you still vegan?" And once you know the cruelty involved, whenever somebody asks me that, the way I hear that is, "Are you still kind to animals?"